Whoever is listening, guys, welcome back. My name is Grayson Mann, and welcome to the Man with the Plan podcast and part 8 of our Clemson football preview series. We're winding down this series. It's been an absolute blast to produce. We've got Georgia Tech, North Carolina, and with the Clemson fans in my audience, we got South Carolina coming up, so you got to brace for that one. Today we have Kelly Quinlan, the publisher of Jackets Online. So, Kelly, welcome to the show, man. Thank you for taking the time to do this.
No problem. Happy to come on.
So just to start out, and I love getting this inside scoop from our writers and talking about what your role is within your specific site. And I know you and I had a prior conversation that covering Georgia Tech's not your only team that you're currently working with. So what's that like, covering multiple teams?
So I have a staff of about 15 guys that work for me. I have multiple rival sites. So I have our Georgia Tech site, which I'm the main beat writer for because I'm in Atlanta. And then I have 3 people who work and help me on that site. I own the second site I got was Cincinnati. I have a guy that covers Cincinnati, and I just kind of help him guide that. A guy covering Mississippi State that there's 2 people working on that site, and they're in Starkville, just younger people trying to build a site from scratch and kind of more of a guiding role there. And then South Florida, I have 2 guys that work on South Florida. I help with the recruiting with that one because I don't do a lot of recruiting with the Georgia Tech thing. I have a full-time recruiting writer and a hoops writer, so recruiting writer. So they kind of handle that on the Georgia Tech beat. So I help just kind of keep my toes in football recruiting. And then we have an Alabama site, so that one's huge. We have, I think, 6 or 7 people working on that site right now, and there again, just kind of overseeing things, doing a lot of administrative stuff, and then kind of being a presence on the message board there more than doing a lot of stuff. Though I just went up to SEC Media Days, which was always a little awkward for me. I covered UGA for 7 years, and so it's a little weird going back there now after having covered Georgia Tech since 2009. Going to I went to the SEC basketball tournament. I went to Media Days the last 2 years, so that's been a little funky. But I feel a little more comfortable with the ACC just because it's my people. But I still have tons of friends that cover the SEC, so it's not that weird. But it is a little. There's a famous quote from Al Groh, the former Virginia coach, that was he felt like a Catholic at a Baptist church, like when he was at Georgia Tech, because it was just so different than Virginia. And I always kind of feel that when I'm at a SEC thing.
Yeah, you certainly get a lot of different perspectives, especially with the conference that's just about to add Oklahoma and Texas to the mix. So that there's probably a little more, not of a buzz, but there's a lot of intrigue heading into at least 2024. Well, next year when we get those 2 teams, but there's obviously going to be a lot of conversation surrounding that. Georgia's trying to repeat or go back to back to back, try to do that 3 times. Yeah, 3. There it is. It's always the words you're trying to find. But yeah, the SEC is always going to have a lot of headlines. So I'm sure that's really fun to be able to go out and explore at the very least.
Yeah, it's not, the actual event's like not as cool as the ACC one, to be honest with you. Like the access is not as good. The food's better at the ACC thing. I think the events run better at the ACC thing, but it is funny watching all these different like personalities try to insert themselves into the SEC one.
It's interesting stuff. So let's start to get into the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. And I think what really speaks out to me, I think this is the only team within this 10-part series that had a coaching change. And in the middle of the season, with Jeff Collins after 4 games being outed, only win was over Western Carolina and included losses to Clemson and UCF. And you bring in a guy like Brent Key, so Georgia Tech starts 1-3, but they're able to finish 500 the rest of the way with big wins over Pittsburgh, ACC runner-up and UNC, and a Duke team that won 9 games in overtime. So what is that kind of process in the middle of the year where there's such an overhaul on the coaching staff? How do you as a reporter, what's your angle for that kind of stuff? And what did you see from Brent Key in 2022 that you really liked?
I thought he did a good job of Jeff Collins made everything about Jeff Collins. Like it was about him and his personality and him talking to the kids about how he's done X, Y, and Z and stuff. And Brent made it all about the players and personal accountability and clean up the locker room. And there was a lot of sort of, Jeff had all these sayings like, everything is earned. And a lot of it was sort of a joke because it wasn't. There was a lot of inherent kind of favoritism to certain players. And I always felt like they didn't understand their personnel really well and kind of what to do. And he was constantly tinkering in the defense. And it was funny. The prime example of this is Andrew Thacker was this guy that Tech fans hated. He was the defensive coordinator. He wasn't really calling the shots. Jeff was, made his bones as a defensive coordinator. So when he gets fired, Thacker just gets to run his defense the way he wants to with help from, the guys on the staff at the time. And they were like night and day different. Like they had played well. They played well against Clemson in the opener, but there would be all these times when they just had a bad plan or whatever, and they get blown out. And that kind of went away and they played pretty consistently. The thing that kind of let them down and why they didn't go to a bowl game was, Jeff Sims, their starting quarterback, gets hurt. They put in Zach Gibson, who was the wrong quarterback, as the backup. He struggles. They put Zach Pyron in, and as a true freshman, he plays well, and then he breaks his collarbone in the Miami game when they're going in to score to, I think, maybe tie the game. And then they end up getting blown out in the end of that game. But they played really well. They had the last two games were two of the most impressive coaching jobs I've ever seen. They played North Carolina and beat North Carolina in North Carolina at night with, their best receiver out and their starting quarterback out and the guy that was the backup out. They were with the third and fourth string quarterback alternating them. Tyson Pumachan coming in and
There he
playing
is.
basically wildcat quarterback at times for them. And then they went into Georgia and they had a chance to go up 2 scores on Georgia. One of the tight ends who's playing hurt drops a pass that probably might have been a touchdown. And Kirby Smart said that was the biggest scare they got in the regular season was that game. And, other than Ohio State, they played Georgia probably the best of anyone last year. So they've shown that he can get the most out of these guys. He's just got to do it now for 13, 14 games, whatever it is. And if you can do that into the season, I think they have a chance because, there's 3 hard games on the schedule. They play early in the season at Ole Miss. You play Clemson in the middle on the road, and then you play Georgia or Clemson really towards the back end of the schedule. And then at Georgia and Atlanta at the end of the year. So the rest of the games are winnable games. I'm not buying into the Louisville hype yet. I don't understand why people think they're going to win 10 games other than their schedule's easy. I think there's probably too much being put on Jeff Brom as being like this Svengali coach, and I don't see it. They have so many new players. And then you look around the rest of the league, Syracuse, Wake Forest. Dave's a great coach at Wake Forest, but they've lost a lot, and they keep losing guys in the portal that are key guys, and you just don't know what you're going to get. That's going to be a tough game. But Syracuse, what is Syracuse this year? There's a lot of things where I look at these games and I'm just like, I don't know. And Carolina hasn't beat Georgia Tech in a while now. That Jeff Collins owned them, and then Brent beat them last year too. So I don't think it's like some gauntlet for whether you're looking at Clemson or Louisville or Carolina or whoever in the league. I think the ACC is very average again this year, and there's going to be somebody that probably jumps up, whoever it is. Maybe if Clemson figures out their offense, they jump up, or maybe it is Louisville or whoever, or Carolina finally stops being, a poor version of NC State. Whatever it is, there's some point where someone's going to jump.
And so for you, I think we touched on this a little bit earlier, but what for you as a reporter, I think there's an interesting angle I think I briefly touched on this in the earlier question, is when you have this kind of coaching switch, what's that process like for you when there's such an overhaul and such a turn, whatever details you're able to share, obviously, what is that process like?
So it was a little different because Brent and I have a really good relationship. So I was closer to him than I was with Jeff Collins. So it was a little bit different. It was interesting because Jeff Collins had practices open and kind of this open door policy, but there was all these rules about what you could report. It was an interesting way of kind of containing information because he allowed us in, but it actually thwarted a lot of the inside information you would normally get because we would see things that I already knew, but I couldn't report because I saw them with my own eyes, and so did everyone else. So then it looked sketchy if I put it out there. Brent shut everything down and went kind of into a bunker with his guys for the last 9 weeks or whatever it was, of this 8 weeks of the season. and I guess it was 9 because they had a bye. And it was very different, and it was very like, even the personalities of the coaches and stuff were a little bit different. Just seeing them kind of be themselves. I think there was a lot of sort of jive with the coaches, like trying to act like how they thought Jeff wanted them to act. And Thacker, again, is the example I use there. He's a totally different person talking to the media now than he was, even in person. Like, he's much more relaxed than he was a year ago. Like, he's just totally kind of changed his vibe. And so I think, that's one of the things you adjust to. I think there was a lot of pushback from people wanting them to go out and make outside hires that didn't like Brent, because the offensive line had some struggles, because that was going to be the quarterback and the offensive line were going to be the two biggest changes when you made the switch from the triple option. And they missed on some guys and had some bad strategy, but a lot of that was Jeff Collins' strategy. Like, they wanted to go into the portal and didn't want to build it as organically. And so those things all kind of add up too. And so there were a lot of people blaming, I think, Brent. And there was, it's a conversation I've had with him before too, was like, you haven't had to work with he had been a long time since he had coached kind of misfit toys. He was at Alabama coaching 5 NFL guys, like, so there is a little bit of a learning curve. They hired a guy who knows how to work with, as I would call it, misfit toys, and Jeep Wade from Appalachian State to be the O-line coach now. And Brent says he does an amazing job. So, it is interesting. It's interesting to going from it wasn't as weird as like Jeff Collins. When Jeff Collins hired, I didn't know him from Adam, and he had been at Georgia Tech before I ever covered them as a staff assistant and stuff. But I mean, it's one of those things that I've learned over the years. I covered Mark Richt at Georgia, I covered Paul Johnson. So that was very interesting, covering two guys one who became a legendary coach and one who came into Georgia Tech as a guy that with a really strong legacy, and kind of embraced me and brought me into his world a little bit. So it's been interesting. Brent totally gets it. That's the one thing I will say. Like, he understands what our relationships are, and how to make it convenient for me to do my job, which is, the biggest thing for me is, like, I don't want to have 8,000 roadblocks and trying to do my job.
Yeah, absolutely. And as he adjusts into, and it's weird to call it his second year just because you
It's
take it
not
what as
really,
a,
like, it's
yeah.
one of those, yeah, like, this is for, like, we had a long conversation about just like, what, yeah, asked my thoughts about like media access and things like that. Just like, because he wasn't sure what to do. Like, he's trying to figure it all out. And he had plans and understanding of what he wanted to do, but he was open-minded enough to, like, even hear myself out, or someone, like a couple other people on the beat. Like, what do you guys need? What do what helps you guys do your job better? What makes my job easier too in dealing with you? Like, and I was like, a little bit of access helps, because it will take out some of the stupid questions, or it'll allow us to ask more informed questions in some ways without having to wait and see who's in the lineup. And it takes out some of the nonsense you deal with during the week, if you even just going in for practice for a half hour, 45 minutes.
Yeah, and I think what's unique about, and this is something that I've learned in the last year doing, like, covering Clemson football, for example, is that relationship between, there's almost like a give and take of,
Absolutely.
and what he's trying to learn as well is, not only is he trying to adjust to being the head guy on the football field, he's got to be the face of the program. He's got to be able to answer the tough questions. And so there is a significant learning curve that goes beyond just X's and O's. So that is something that I guess in time it gets a little easier, but it's still a process. And there's such a rotation with people and trying to learn, building relationships. It's a long process.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I was working yesterday in the SEC media room, and Sam Pittman went up to talk, who's an offensive line coach who became a head coach at Arkansas, and is still kind of green in some ways as a head coach. And it was interesting watching kind of the ebb and flow of his press conference, because there were a couple of times where he got into the weeds on some things and was trying to be too cute or too funny, or, try to bond with somebody for no apparent reason. Like, he got asked about Oklahoma or something. Like, there was a lot of that. The Texas and Oklahoma talk was pretty heavy at the podium. And so it's interesting to watch these guys kind of handle things. Jeff Collins did a complete 180 from Temple, and like just was like overly positive about it. Like, if they got just beat down, like when they got embarrassed by Clemson when the punter threw a touchdown. Like in Atlanta, he was acting like it was like a close game, and that was insulting to people. Like you can't do that. So I think Brent, the one thing that Brent is, he's extremely honest. I think that goes a long way with people. If you're willing to address and help them understand what the challenges are, they're going to be a lot more likely to support you versus sugarcoating everything. And I think that's what also got Jeff in trouble, is, talking about how elite they were at everything. And then you have, 4 punts blocked in a season. Like you're not elite. And that was the one thing that Jeff coached. So it's like, those are the things that I think Brent has learned just from watching that up close and watching Nick Saban and how Nick and his wife operate with recruiting and how they handle day-to-day stuff, and George O'Leary and how he handled day-to-day stuff. And so it's a very different vibe down there, but the kids seem to like it and they respect him. And I think that's a huge thing that was maybe missing from the program.
Yeah, and as we adjust, or he adjusts into his, I put it in air quotes, his second year, is still kind of the rookie tag. This really is his first full off season with Georgia Tech. And as they head into spring ball, something that I picked up on is that a quarterback named Haynes King was transferred to Georgia Tech, a name that was big in the SEC, a big commit to Texas A&M at the time, now is in a quarterback battle. So besides with that, and then looking big picture for this Georgia Tech team, as they build off momentum from a pretty strong finish to the season, given how things started, what have been your impressions with this program in the spring, and what are you looking forward to once fall camp kicks off?
I think the quarterback battle is a huge thing that people talk about. Everyone seems to forget that Zach Pyron was like a higher rated recruit. He was committed to Baylor and ended up flipping to Georgia Tech because he wanted to be closer to home. And everyone's like very excited about Haynes King, and Zach sort of outplayed him if you look kind of at the parallels, even though he's a year younger. So Zach Pyron, if they started today, would be the starting quarterback. He was head and shoulders above Haynes King in the spring. Now, whether that changes in the fall or not, that's, what camp's about. They haven't named a quarterback, and I don't expect them to. Maybe even before the first game, just for gamesmanship. But they're very similar guys, both tough guys, can run the offense. Buster Faulkner came over from UGA to be the offensive coordinator, has a lot of experience running the offense. He's an Atlanta Metro kid from Parkview High School, and had was a college quarterback, and then was offense coordinator in Mississippi State and Southern Miss and some other places. And they're going to try to make it as easy as they can on the quarterback. I think they have a good offensive system. The defense has just been tweaked a little bit. They brought in some new coaches just because they had they made a couple changes on the staff to get better recruiters in, and just have some guys that Brent was maybe a little more comfortable with on the staff. And so they have a really strong staff now. They hired a special teams coach to address that, because that was a big problem last year for them as well. I think they've kind of addressed the things they can. It's just going to be a matter of, one, staying healthy, which was a big problem last year for them, and then two, being able to execute both offensively and defensively. And I think they have talent in most spots to do that. I think, the few areas of concern I have would be like cornerback is one of the, they lost Amari Walton, transferred to Ole Miss, who was a starting quarterback the last few years, cornerback. They have Miles Sims back, but he was hurt in the spring, so he didn't look like himself. So who's the other starting corner if Miles is healthy? That's one question. Their safety position is probably as good as anyone in the ACC. And then, linebackers, they have a whole new linebacking core. So, like, what does that look like? They have 3 grad transfers. Audrey White from Texas A&M, Braylon Oliver from Minnesota, and Paul Miola from Idaho/Notre Dame. Those 3 guys and Trinela Tatum, they'll be battling for 2 or 3 spots depending on how they line up. So when you look at all of those, are sort of the big overarching questions. There's not a ton of like, hey, this is a really dire situation at this spot or whatever. The defensive line's like very solid. The offensive line, for the first time really since probably about 2014, like well before 2015, maybe, first time in a really long time, they've had what I would call depth, like real serviceable depth there. So I think they have the building blocks. It's just a matter of like, can they execute it? Can they get the ball in their playmakers' hands on offense? Can they be solid defensively? And if they do those things, they have a chance to go bowling. And that's progress. And the big thing for Brent Key is he needs to improve what, Paul Johnson used to talk about. And it's something I believe in as well. You have what we call 1 through 8 talent, right? Like the top end of your roster, who are the 8 best players. And right now they don't have enough of those guys. And that's where you have a difference maker in a game. Like I can go in and make a play that changes the dynamics of the game, whether it's like a kick return guy or a running back that can break open and break off a 50-yard run, whatever those things are, a really dominant slot receiver. Those are those guys, and who ends up being the 1 through 8 guys will kind of make or break their season, I think.
Yeah, and it's interesting the 1 through 8 that you bring that up, and what a guy like Paul Johnson and I think this is a good transition into what this series has really been for this podcast, is that we try to define expectations for each program. And when you ask, the thing that's unique about this episode is that we've had 7 episodes to be able to get these different perspectives. Like talking to Notre Dame, for example, is, hey, this is a team that can compete for potentially a playoff spot. Or Wake Forest saying, hey, if we can reach maybe 7 games, that's a successful season, given everything that's happened. Or a Miami team that's trying to reclaim some of its former glory. Where does Georgia Tech stand within this ACC that you earlier called? It is a weaker version of what it was last year, with a couple of standout teams, but a lot of teams fighting for that middle ground. How does Brent Key and Georgia Tech define success in this coming year and for this future? Obviously, you want Key to stick around for a while. Where does this program go from here? And for you, when you look at, you said bowling would be progress. Is that how this program should define expectations moving forward?
I think, the expectation moving forward is get it back to where they were for 30 something years, which was competing for the top half of the ACC on a regular basis, which they did with Chan Gailey, they did with George O'Leary, and Paul Johnson did a great job of that. Like they were in first place or second place in the division every single year, pretty much, minus 2 or 3 seasons with Paul and 10 plus years. And Chan, went to ACC championship, did a decent job with it. People forget at the time he had scholarship restrictions and things like that. And then O'Leary did a very good job, but it was just at a time where Florida State was really dominant in the league and there was no championship game either. So when you look at all of the things, I think getting back to being in basically what I would say NC State does is sort of the baseline. Like you want to be 7 to 9 wins this season, right? Like that's where you want to hit your baseline. And then having special seasons intermix, which is what Paul Johnson was good at. Paul was let down by, things the administration did and a lot of things that he had no control over, that kind of there was a little more of a roller coaster with it and a little more inconsistent, but especially towards the end. But that should be where they shoot for. And I think Brett's capable of getting them there. It's a question of, being able to develop talent, develop the players they have, keep the players they have, and then going into the portal and adding key pieces here and there. They're not trying to be, Ole Miss and add 50 players in the portal. They're trying to recruit, develop their own players, and then keep them. And that's where Wake Forest kind of falls off the bus, right? Like they develop these superstar players and they leave. And so, that you don't want to lose to Jahmyr Gibbs. Like they lost Jahmyr Gibbs last year at Alabama. That was huge for them, losing him. That cost possibly Jeff his job and probably 3 or 4 wins. And so it probably cost Jahmyr Gibbs a Doak Walker award, like because he went to Alabama and he was one of 3 running backs there, and they used him in a rotation versus having to be the bell cow. So, when you look at all this stuff, I think that they clearly are able to get talent in. It's, that development piece wasn't what it should have been. And then being able to sustain it on a regular basis and not be like this team where everyone's like, oh, what are they going to be this year? One guy gets hurt and the wheels come off. Like that's kind of what it's been the last few years. And I think you want to get back to the one thing that Paul Johnson did a great job of is every time they went on the field, except for the last time he played Georgia, they had a chance to win. Even when they played Clemson, most of those games were close. Like they were hanging with them, even when they were totally overmatched. He was able to figure out a way to have a competitive game. And Brent has shown the ability to do that a little bit. Can he show that as a sustainable thing with his staff? That's going to be what's going to make or break him.
Yeah, and I think for Georgia Tech in a year like this in the ACC, where there's a lot more questions than answers for a lot of these teams, and so if Georgia Tech can maybe pick up a significant win, you mentioned the three I think that came to mind were Ole Miss, Clemson, and Georgia. Even if they, like you said, can play them close and have that belief system start to materialize, that hey, we do have a chance in these games. Maybe they don't win any of those, but they're all close, for example. And so these players can go into that offseason saying, hey, we gave Clemson and Georgia, who are playoff contenders, Ole Miss, who's a near six bowl contender. We gave them runs, we gave them something to think about. And I think that would be a long way moving forward. And if you can compete with the Georgias and the Clemsons, there's no reason why they shouldn't win at least 8 games a year.
Yep. And with the way the schedule's realigning, that should help them. Georgia Tech always had sort of the tougher deal because they always had Clemson and they would play the game against UGA every year. So you had the 2 games that were as hard as anyone else's 2 games. Really the only other team that had that is South Carolina every year in their schedule. Like if you look across the country, or maybe one of the SEC West, Auburn playing Alabama and Georgia every year, right? Like there were not a lot of those where you had this absolute, you got to play these 2 killer teams every year. That was the way it's been really since Clemson got rolling. That also hurt Georgia Tech when they started rolling. That made that game that had been a little bit more even, it really shifted over towards Clemson. And so, yeah, I mean, you got to just try to manage it. The schedule is what it is. They got to schedule smarter. The Ole Miss series got pushed back. That was supposed to be 10 years ago, and they didn't want to deal with Paul Johnson. So they kept punting it. So, getting some of those games off their schedule will help a lot too. Like this is the end of that one. I think they got Colorado coming up in a few years. Like they've stopped doing some of these like more crazy non-conference cheapo scheduling things that they did.
Yeah, and I think that we could transition. You talk about Clemson a little bit, and this is one of the other things that I like to our writers to answer when they are part of this series is that it's one thing for me to be able to say, "Oh, Clemson's done this and this in the offseason. This is what they're going to be like," or "This is my perspective on the last 2 years." Because you look back from 2015 to 2020, obviously there's great standouts like Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence, but they lost a total of 7 games in that stretch. The last 2 seasons 6 games, 6 losses in 2 seasons. Obviously, the Uyunglele experiment didn't work out like Clemson fans hoped it would. And Dabo Swinney, after the Orange Bowl, makes the change with Brandon Streeter, the first-time offensive coordinator. He brings in Garrett Riley, who's the big name from TCU, hoping to revamp this offense back to the standard that they want to raise it to. And from your perspective, what have you seen from Clemson in the last 2 years? What made those last 2 seasons kind of the roller coaster affair that it was? And where do you see them as a potential playoff contender, power in the ACC? What do you see from them moving forward? What is your perspective?
I thought they were extremely underachieving the last 2 years. I thought offensively at times it looked like there was a guy playing Madden, just picking plays off of a playbook, like in a video game. Like they were not setting things up. There was not a lot of strategy to it. You had a quarterback who couldn't execute what you were asking him to do. And it made no sense to me. And I'm not a big Tony Elliott guy. I thought, I thought him and Jeff Scott, there was a lot, they were more talented than other people. And that's a way you can win. Absolutely. And if you have an elite guy that's self-driven like Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence, I think that shows you. I think you've seen Virginia now with Tony Elliott. He made terrible decisions with their quarterback, who was a really good quarterback. And it's like clearly maybe it was a little bit of smoke and mirrors in terms of like how good a coach they were. What did Dabo do to turn things around? He went outside of his bubble and hired Brent Venables, who was an amazing defensive coordinator. He went and got Chad Morris, who was a great offensive mind to replace Billy Napier. And then that kick-started their move. And then he tried to grow organically, and he did not have guys that were ready for that because I think the coaches that were there were not developing the guys in the way they needed to be ready to jump up. Venables is a very hands-on guy. Like he wasn't grooming some dude to take over for him. And I just don't think at Clemson, you don't hire from within to be your offensive coordinator, especially when the guy was struggling, that was your offensive coordinator a little bit. So to me, I think he's made the right moves. It'll be interesting to see what that looks like now as a team. But I think he got back to what made him successful, which is follow what Nick Saban does, right? Like, I'm going to go out and hire the best guy I can get, right? Or Kirby Smart, like, I'm going to go hire the best guy I can get. And the problem for Dabo is he's not like Nick or Kirby, who are great defensive minds, where they develop a guy organically through their staff. Dabo couldn't call the offense, like, and he'd probably tell you that, like, if you asked him honestly, like, he's got to be able to find these guys organically. You can't just, I mean, not organically, but go out and find guys, via the coaching, search. Like, this is the next big guy. He needs to find his version of Mike Elko, who helped make Dave Clawson what he is, like, or, going and getting a hotshot offensive coordinator, not going and promoting some dude that played for him because they're tight and it's comfortable for him. And coaches get complacent. I've seen this with a lot of coaches, and guys make mistakes and they have friendships, and I think he's gotten back to what made him successful. So it'll be interesting to see what that looks like. I still think their portal philosophy is a mistake. I think they should be going in and trying to find upgrades where they can get them and be a little more aggressive with it. But maybe time will tell if he's right or wrong on that. I think you don't need to go add 10 guys, but I think you can go add 3 or 4 guys that can immediately help your roster. That's what Alabama's doing. That's what Georgia Tech's doing. Georgia, like, these programs are going out and getting guys who can come in and start or push for a starting job. And when you have offensive line problems, right, that's the big thing that's killed Clemson too. The last, you go back to Trevor Lawrence, really, like, the offensive line's not been very good. So, I think that's where you've got to figure some things out. They have money and resources to do that. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to me to be so anti, let's go out and get like the great offensive tackle who, yeah, maybe we have to pay him $500,000, but we've got the money, like, in our collective. Let's go get this guy who can help us win, even if it's one more game. Like at Clemson, you're talking about 9 to 10 wins or 11, 12 or whatever it is. Like, that one guy could be the difference between you making the playoffs and not making the playoffs.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I stressed when Garrett Riley got hired is that going outside your bubble with Brent Venables, with Chad Morris, is getting, and I hate the term yes man, but I think getting a guy with fresh and unique ideas into a program, especially one that's been doing something that they've 2 national championships and consistent playoff appearances, you start to get comfortable with what you're doing. And that routine becomes, like you say, you can get complacent sometimes with that. So bringing in a new face with a new idea, saying, hey, this is how we did it here, can invigorate some new life into a program that's felt a little bit stuck in the mud the last 2 years, if I wanted to put it like that.
Yeah, I think there was just too much. He did too much of, like, promoting from within, like, and that happens at a lot of, I've seen that happen with so many coaches. And sometimes you have to break away from that. I saw with Mark Richt, he kept promoting, his, like, defensive coordinator was his old friend that had coached with him forever and a former teammate. And, like, he had to break away from that guy to kind of kick his program up a level. You just see this, and it's one of those things that if you don't have guys getting hired off your staff becomes a problem, where you're like, so-and-so's been with me for a long time. So, and I saw it firsthand because, like I said, I've covered USF recruiting. So I watched Jeff Scott flounder horribly and have no idea what the hell he was doing. Daquan Bowers went there to be the D-line coach and he struggled. The one guy who actually did a really good job, I thought, was Cam Aiken, who had been this long time, like, staff guy for Dabo, and he got to be the running backs coach down there. He did a great job, but most of those guys, I think, were a little overmatched. And Xavier Dye, like, these guys just were not maybe ready for that level of job. They were not developed enough to jump into a FBS job. And so, I mean, if you want Brandon Streeter to be your offensive coordinator, you needed to go send him somewhere for a few years to work with someone else to get and send him, have him go call plays at App State or wherever for a few years to get some seasoning. Throwing that guy into the frying pan was a disservice to him, like, as a coach, like, and that's where, some of these coaches get caught either in hubris or just trying to reward their guys or whatever it is. And, I think Dabo had to learn that lesson the hard way. It cost him, another ring, like, at least, and, squandered some teams.
Yeah, and with that, it was and I bring this up with I think Dabo would probably never say this, but sometimes they'll look back, and if Garrett Riley's what people hope he is, you go, maybe the 2022 season, you needed to go through that. You needed a bit of a kick in the face
Sure.
to kind of re-energize some of what made Clemson successful for that 7-year stretch.
Yeah, I think that adversity is a great motivator. I was just watching Nick Saban, and he seemed much more relaxed than he was a year ago. And I think he thinks they're going to be sneaky good and surprise people. And so, I think he was more uptight last year because he didn't know like what they were, and they were getting picked high, and it was sort of a lot about Bryce Young. And I think these coaches kind of have a sense, and you can tell. I'll be curious to see what I don't know if I'll be there when Clemson's there, but see what Dabo's like in Charlotte at the ACC kickoff, like, because you can learn a lot by just kind of seeing their personas and like what they're like and stuff. And I get a little bit of vibe off him. And I like Dabo. I think he's he's done a tremendous job as a coach. I think he's one of these guys is incredibly loyal, and it can be a disservice to you at times in a business that doesn't reward that in a lot of ways. And Clemson fans were complaining when they had weren't winning the national championship and getting eliminated in the playoffs. And he's like, hey, do you remember what it was with the two Tommies? Before I took this job over. And I'll never forget the story I always tell is I was at the ACC championship in 2009, and two big Clemson boosters, two older guys, walked over to me. I was shooting pictures. I had another guy up in the box writing the game, and I just kind of wanted to be on the field and shoot pictures for that game. And these two boosters walk up to me, go, you cover Georgia Tech? I was like, yeah. Goes, well, we wish we had your coach and not that moron Dabo coaching us. And that was and then they won 6 games the next year or whatever. And then he turned it around. So you never know what you have, but it's always funny to me, when someone says something like that, oh, I remember, North Carolina fans crowing about Larry Fedora. I knew what was wrong with Larry Fedora. I watched what happened at Southern Miss after he left. He couldn't run a program. He was going to win with talent as long as it was there, but he didn't know how to replenish it in a lot of ways, and was very much going to always sacrifice his defense for his offense. He didn't know how to coach with balance. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into all this. And I think Dabo's a smart guy, and I think I think he's a tremendous recruiter and does a good job, and people respect him. And I think he will continue to have that thing be a juggernaut. He's just got to find the right people to run it, because it is almost in cruise control. And the problem with cruise control is you can kind of fall asleep at the wheel. And I think that's what happened the last couple of years.
Yep, and we'll see if some of these offseason hires start to pay off beginning in the fall with Duke. So this was episode 134 of the Name of the Plan podcast, and part 8 of 10 within our Clemson football preview series. It's been a blast to be able to continue this series along with Kelly Quinlan, the publisher of Jackets Online. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
No, just looking forward to watching football in 40 days, something like that. No, less than that. 30, basically a month and a couple of days away from first kickoff for week 0.
The countdown begins. So guys, thank you so much for listening to this episode. And if you enjoyed this, leave a thought down below, and just continue to do the support that you've been pouring onto the series. Subscribe, leave all the comments. You guys know what to do. Have a great day and take care.